I need a huge favor. I'm pretty sure you owe me like 40 favors at this point. I promised this girl I would make her the best dish in the world.
And?
I don't know how to cook, bro.
Who is it?
No clue, actually, it's our first date.
What's her name?
I literally said it's our first date, dude. I have no idea.
Dude.
Well, I kind of need it tonight.
Bro, stop throwing stuff at me. It's extremely hard to edit.
Rendang is regarded by many as one of, if not the greatest dish on the planet. I feel like stateside it's not discussed quite as much in that regard, but as I've learned, it probably should be. It's an Indonesian or Malay so-called dry curry, meaning that it's cooked down so long that most of the liquid evaporates and you're left with this really concentrated, just really thick coating on the beef. So for the beef, I had about a pound each of brisket and chuck roast in my freezer. Chuck roast is probably the better option to use for this because it's cheaper and it's not as tough as brisket. Like a brisket flat like this is great if you smoke it really long as a whole brisket, but in applications like this, I've noticed that it just comes out sort of tough. But regardless, I'm just cutting those down into a little less than 1-inch chunks. You want them to be bite-sized because they're going to cook down but stay in their shape, just be really tender for someone to eat in one bite. And for this curry, we need to prep separately a curry paste and a curry powder. For the paste, this is a spicy curry, so we're going to start with some chilies. I've got about 6 chiles de árbol, a classic dried spicy pepper used in a lot of cuisines, and I like to supplement with some lesser spicy chilies. A lot of people opt for guajillo, which is a really flavorful and really good choice, but I had some of these dried Aleppo peppers that my friend Debbie gifted me with. They're not super spicy, so I figured this was a good application for them. I'm removing the seeds because I think they have enough spice as is. I've also got a medium-sized red onion. You could use like 4 to 5 shallots instead, 5 or 6 cloves of garlic, a good bit of fresh ginger root, and if you can find it, fresh galangal is also traditional in this dish. It's really similar to ginger but a lot harder to find. I tell you, I went to 6 different stores looking for this and couldn't find it, so you can just supplement with more ginger if needed. Lastly, a couple of bird's eye Thai chilies because I just want some more spice in this. I'm getting everything roughly chopped so I can just dump it into the food processor. Then I'm just going to whiz all that up until it's as fine as I can get it. I had to use a spoon a few times to scrape down things to make sure it got into the blades. And just to make it a little more cohesive, I'm drizzling in a little bit of neutral oil. I think it just helps bind the paste together, but it doesn't really matter because this is going to be cooked in oil anyway. This is an interesting spice paste that's going to have its own flavor profile, a little different than the other curries that you're probably used to. And speaking of, we're going to make our own spice powder made from some dried aromatics. I've got 1 small cinnamon stick, 3 star anise, 5 cloves, and a handful of black peppercorns. It's always a good idea to toast these in a dry pan before using because it brings out more of their flavor. So after a couple of minutes on medium heat, the fragrance will start to come out and then you can dump it into a molcajete or a mortar and pestle. If you have a spice grinder, that'll work in this scenario also. It'll take a few minutes, but just pound all of that into oblivion. I'm going to finish by adding a little dash of ground cardamom because I couldn't get it whole, and also the same of turmeric. If you can get that fresh, you can add that into the spice paste. But either way, that's a beautiful curry powder that's going to stand out in this rendang. A couple more things I'm going to prep, starting with a little bit of fresh lemongrass. I've got 3 stalks that I'm going to chop the bottoms off of and leave the woody top parts off. We're not going to keep these in the dish because they're really tough and fibrous, but we want the flavor. So the way to release that is to cut this into some smaller pieces and then just bruise it up with the back of a knife. Either beat it with the base of a knife or just tap along it with the back of the blade. That's going to allow it to release the flavors as the stew simmers. Now another traditional ingredient that I couldn't find is kaffir lime leaves. That's probably the signature flavor in this dish, but if you can't find it, I don't think that should stop you from making it. To substitute, I'm just going to take 2 limes and zest off the outside. Using a microplane makes this super easy. You just zip along from top to bottom. I can't tell you how much different this is from the kaffir lime leaf flavor because I've never tried real rendang, but you're still just looking for that citrusy flavor which lime zest is full of. Lastly, I've got a little bit of tamarind paste that I'm just going to scoop off about 2 teaspoons of and put in some hot water. You just want to soak this for a few minutes so it's easier to incorporate into the stew when you use it. This brings a super distinct sweetness to this dish, which as you'll see later really stands out at the end. And now to get cooking, I'm starting with my Dutch oven over medium-high heat. You could definitely use some neutral oil here, but since this is technically a coconut curry, I'm going to use some coconut oil. Once that melts, I'm going to fry up my curry paste for a few minutes. Just trying to release all those flavors and start to brown up the aromatics inside. I'm also seasoning with a little pinch of salt here, but just be careful. You don't really want to season to taste until the end because a lot of the added liquid is going to go away and make everything much more concentrated. But before the paste burns, I'm going to quickly toss in the spice mix and toast that as well, just for about 30 seconds, and then I can add in my beef. And yes, normally you sear your protein before making the stew, But since this basically cooks until all the liquid is gone, this is going to kind of sear itself at the end. I guess you could call this a kind of reverse searing process. But we are going to stir that beef around for about 5 minutes until it gets coated in all those spices. And then you can come in with some coconut milk or coconut cream in my case. I think coconut milk is more traditional, but I only found coconut cream. It just means it has more fat and less of the lightning color. So in my case, the rendang ended up darker and with a little more oil at the end. But I think either option is viable. It's up to you. So just get that brought up to a boil and then lower it to a simmer where it will stay until everything is done cooking and the meat is tender. At this point, I throw in my lemongrass and let that steep. And while that begins to simmer, I'm going to go ahead and get my toasted coconut flakes ready. This is something I haven't seen in a curry before, but it makes total sense. I'm getting about 1/3 of a cup of unsweetened coconut flakes into a dry pan. And just like the spices, we're going to toast this over medium-low heat. You're just trying to get an even brown color throughout without burning it. I think mine took like 7 to 8 minutes. Just make sure you're constantly moving it so nothing burns. And again, like the spices, after we reach that point, I'm going to add this to my molcajete and pound away. Once it's mostly a powder, we can add it right into our curry. It's going to bring a beautiful coconut flavor to this, but also some roastiness because we toasted it. Just think of it like another seasoning. It's at this point I'm adding in my soaked tamarind paste as well as the lime zest or the kaffir lime leaves if you have those. And now your job is just to let this simmer until most of the liquid is gone and the meat is tender. I like to leave this half covered so the steam can escape, but it also doesn't dry out too much. You do have to stir this more frequently as time goes on. The less liquid in the pan, the more susceptible it is to burning. But after 1 hour, this is what things are looking like. Definitely much thicker, but if you take a piece of beef and try to poke it with a fork, you'll notice that it's not tender at all. So we still have a ways to go, but we're making progress. After 2 hours, it's much darker and still much thicker, but the beef is still not where I want it to be, so I'm going to continue simmering. And now after a little over 3 hours, there's almost no liquid left in the pot. It's so thick and pasty, which is what we want this curry to be. The beef is pretty tender at this point, so I'm going to stop cooking here. I think this could reasonably take anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, so just keep an eye on it. I'll remove those lemongrass leaves and I'll finish seasoning with the juice of 1 lime. You can add to taste here, but I like the acidity at the end. If you were to cook with that from the beginning, most of that would cook off, so you wouldn't really taste it. Also, for a tiny bit more sweetness, 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. Like I said, the tamarind paste is really going to carry most of the sweetness from the dish, but a little more can't hurt. So I like to serve a couple of heaping spoonfuls next to some fresh white rice. You don't have to try to saturate the bowl. Remember, this is a really concentrated paste, so it's going to have a lot of flavor. Less is more. I'll finish by garnishing with some green onion and some sliced Thai chili. Again, a really thick and rich curry that carries its own flavor profile that most people I think in the States aren't used to. Let's talk about it over a taste test.
This is a real treat. I know I didn't have 100% of the ingredients, but I don't think that should stop anyone from trying to make something close enough. From the things I've heard about this dish, it's like a once-in-a-lifetime experience, so I really can't wait. And it's not every day you get to say experience something like that. So not super saucy, but it's concentrated enough to go with the rice perfectly and suit all of your needs. Let's do this. Cheers. Goodness gracious. Okay, I can instantly see why a lot of people agree that this is one of the GOAT dishes. It's all in that slow cooked paste that spends hours just cooking down and getting super flavorful, releasing all of its water and squeezing all of those flavors we added to the pot just into this tiny little amount. It's like your taste buds are trying to process all the different flavors that are punching it. I mean, what really comes through to me is the sweetness from that tamarind paste specifically. It just has a unique flavor, and those 2 teaspoons that we put in there stand through all the rest of the stuff that's in here. I honestly thought this was gonna have an overwhelming coconut taste because of the coconut oil and the coconut cream and then the coconut flakes that we put in here, but it melds really well. Of course you can taste the coconut, but it's not overpowering. And then all the distinct curry spices and the chilies that we put into the curry paste. It's not like a Thai curry or an Indian curry, it's just a thing on its own. It has its own flavor profile, and it's just amazing that you can try so many foods and there's still new things for you to try that like just activate your taste buds in a different way. This has been on my list to make for a while. I just needed some time to do it because it takes time. And around this time every year, I work less at both my jobs, so I have a little more time to dedicate to this. It's my favorite time of year. I don't know how scheduling is gonna go, but this might be my last video posted before Christmas. If so, Merry Christmas to you all. Coming up on the end of another year. I hope you all had a good year. And if you've even spent 5 seconds watching my videos, I truly appreciate it. Made some good progress on the channel this year. Things are still a little slow, but I'm really thankful for everything. But that's gonna do it for me today. Thank you all for watching, be blessed, and I'll see you next time. Suddenly, Indonesia and Malaysia appear on my travel destination list.